Hey guys, Bud Elliot here. Welcome back into the Cover 3 College Football Podcast. It's a summer school series, and today we are talking a heavy. We are talking Texas, and for that, I'm bringing on my man, Chip Brown, the foremost expert in the Texas market, Horns 24/7. Chip, welcome to the show.
Hey, Bud, man, it's great to be here on Cover 3 Summer School. Let's do this.
No doubt, man. So last year, 8-5, one of the absolute best by the power ratings, 8-5 teams you'll ever see. I'm sure Texas fans would probably take the reverse of that, right? Like a 11-1, but maybe not a great 11-1. They'd rather have the wins. But I mean, they did grade out across pretty much all the power rating systems, which are kind of more predictive year to year than record, as a top 10 football team. They did a lot of things well, and they did a couple things that were just kind of killer in some games. 2-5 in single score games. I mean, third down execution. It had to be sort of frustrating to cover this teams at time, I would imagine.
Yeah, it was because Steve Sarkisian, offensive guru, he was brought into Texas to match wits with Lincoln Riley. Of course, Riley's now at USC, so the door is even more wide open for Steve Sarkisian. But the guy's great at scripting plays. It's almost like the first half, he gets off to good starts. He had double-digit leads against Texas Tech, against Oklahoma State, two games that Texas ultimately lost. And the Oklahoma State game was really painful because he was averaging 6.5 a carry on one fourth quarter drive with Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson, and then 11 yards per carry on a second drive in the fourth quarter. And both times he decided to throw it on second and third down and came away with a loss is what he came away with. And so, it's fascinating. He should have won that game absolutely against Oklahoma State. Texas Tech, you got to give them credit. They were down 14. Joey McGuire went for it 8 times on fourth down, converted 6 of them. I don't think Texas was prepared. They hadn't seen Texas Tech go crazy on fourth down yet. That was the Big 12 opener for both schools in Lubbock last year. But, it's fascinating to me that Steve Sarkisian goes and hires Paul Chryst, the former Wisconsin head coach, and a guy who's known for running the football, finding different ways to pound the rock. And I think that's reassuring because it seems to me like Steve Sarkisian gave up on the run last year at times, even with Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson in the backfield. Now without those guys, you got Jonathan Brooks and some young guys, CJ Baxter, Jaden Blue. It's probably good to have Paul Chryst in the room, maybe nudging Steve Sarkisian, hey, stay patient with the run.
Absolutely. So last year that offense was 28th in the country opponent adjusted, which feels kind of lacking. Like I don't remember when the last time Texas had a better defense than an offense, but last year it felt like it did for much of the season. They had some interesting splits I want to ask you about, Chip. So they were very lethal when they had like play action downs. When the run was actually a threat and they chucked it, like they hit a lot of explosive plays that way. When they got behind the chains, though, like this was a legitimately poor, 2nd and 7, 2nd and 8 type team, and especially like 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6. They really struggled in those situations. I'm assuming a good part of that is quarterback. So I'm curious, like, where do you see Quinn Ewers being better this year, if you do see him being better?
Well, I think the second year jump in Steve Sarkisian's offenses in the past, you look at Mac Jones when he went from, coming in relief of Tua Tagovailoa to when he was running the show and won the national championship in 2020, the numbers were off the charts. And I've asked Steve Sarkisian about that, and he has said he hasn't ruled out Quinn Ewers making a similar type jump, going from 58% completion rate. Mac Jones went to 77%, broke Colt McCoy's single season completion percentage record. I don't know that anyone's expecting that, but a jump to 70% completion rate is certainly going to help Quinn Ewers and this Texas offense convert some of those, trouble situations, some of those 2nd, 3rd and longs, because last year it seemed like Quinn Ewers was stuck on Xavier Worthy, and Steve Sarkisian even admitted at times that he was instructing Quinn Ewers to throw it to Xavier Worthy when, this year you're going to have A.D. Mitchell as a receiving option. You're going to get Isaiah Nayer back from injury after he caught 12 touchdown passes at Wyoming 2 years ago. You've got Jordan Whittington back. You've got Xavier Worthy back. Steve Sarkisian's telling people privately that the skill talent on the outside is getting closer to what he had at Alabama in 2019 and 2020 when he had Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle and John Mechie and just
Henry Ruggs
unbelievable core receivers.
Yeah, just the ridiculous core receivers. I was going to ask you, I mean, with all the guys you mentioned, they also have Jatavian Sanders, who I know a lot of people are very high on at the tight end position. Does this room have like second best receiver room in the country potential? I'm not going to put them in the Ohio State category because they kind of have a guy that basically makes the conversation moot for everybody else if you're ranking the receiver rooms with Marvin Harrison Jr. there in Columbus. But like, can this be a top 2, top 3 receiver room in the country?
I mean, based on Steve Sarkisian's history, I think you have to put them in the conversation. Now, they got to earn their way into that conversation because honestly, the receiver room was a disappointment last year. And again, I think some of that was Steve Sarkisian's inability to figure out exactly where Quinn Ewers was in his development and what Quinn Ewers' comfort level was in that offense. Quinn Ewers is a bit of an enigma because the last full season of football that he played was his sophomore year in high school. His junior year, he was injured. He only played 6 games. His senior year, he skipped because he reclassified, went to Ohio State early, spent 3 months there, and then came to Texas. And I consider Quinn Ewers a first-year starter last year, despite being a redshirt freshman. He didn't get any meaningful snaps at Ohio State. Plus, Steve Sarkisian's offense is incredibly verbose because of all the protections and motions that are in it. For quarterbacks to get comfortable, Steve Sarkisian himself has said, I like second-year quarterbacks in my system. I don't like first-year quarterbacks in my system. And I'll say this, Bud, Quinn Ewers, don't leave the field, Quinn Ewers, because Malik Murphy has emerged as a guy who's not to be taken lightly. He's probably underlisted at 6'5". He's probably 6'6". But the guy has unbelievable arm talent, but this guy has the moxie of those great quarterbacks who've led teams when you didn't expect them maybe to perform as well. This guy has that ability to kind of put a team on his back. Based on what he did at Sarah High School in California, he dragged a team that was not expected to win a state championship to a state championship. He did it with a sprained AC joint in his throwing shoulder. This guy's a warrior.
I mean, his spring game was unreal. And when I think about like the top backup quarterbacks in the country, I mean, really, to me, it's a couple of guys. It's probably like whoever doesn't win the Georgia job, whoever does not win Ohio State. Murphy, as you said, Nussmeier at LSU. Get guys that stayed because they see themselves as perhaps the heir apparent to the job if the guy ahead of them is going to jump after this season. And the run game around Ewers or heck, if Murphy takes another huge step or something and really contends for it this fall, the run game will be something interesting to watch. They do lose 2,200 rushing yards from Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson. Where would you rank this room within the Big 12 now with the returning guys?
Well, I think Jonathan Brooks is really talented. I think he's going to be the guy on day one, and then it's how he handles that job. I think this kid is really special. He has really good vision. Every time we've seen him on the field, he's been productive, and Steve Sarkisian has said as much, which is sort of a tip that Jonathan Brooks is going to be the first guy out there. He's starving from what I'm told. This guy has waited his turn patiently for 2 years behind Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson. He had a big game against Kansas in a blowout win where Bijan Robinson went nuts for over 200 yards rushing. But Jonathan Brooks came in and ran for 108 yards, had a 70-yard touchdown run in that game, and he can catch the football. So he fits everything that Steve Sarkisian wants in that running back role. He's a bigger guy, which Steve Sarkisian likes. And so I think this running back room is underrated. My only question is how confident is Steve Sarkisian in Jonathan Brooks? If he didn't hand the ball to Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson to close out the Oklahoma State game last year. Is he going to do it with Jonathan Brooks? And I think Jonathan Brooks is up for the task.
Absolutely. I got to ask you here about a guy local to me. I live in Orlando, Cedric Baxter. How has he looked so far? A five-star running back that Texas signed in the last cycle. I believe he was an early enrollee, I think, right?
Yes, C4 he goes by, and he got Jordan Whittington to give up that number 4. Jordan Whittington, a senior, 5th-year senior receiver, said it was more meaningful to CJ Baxter than it was to him. But CJ Baxter is a sponge, and this guy is, man, he's hungry too, and that's where I think he needs some time in this offense. The biggest part, obviously, is blitz pickup and his assignments in protection for the quarterback. If he picks that up quickly and shows in fall camp that he's digested everything that he learned in the spring, then he's going to be in the rotation. Jaden Blue is an interesting guy. He's a burner. He hasn't shown yet that he can, pound between the tackles like Jonathan Brooks, and CJ Baxter being a bigger guy. And so it'll be interesting to see if Jaden Blue ends up as more of a scat back, kind of like Keelan Robinson, who's still at Texas after transferring from Alabama. So it's a deep running back room. Sarkisian has shown he'll use 3 running backs, but really it'll probably be 2. And CJ Baxter could get into that rotation with Jonathan Brooks.
I don't know how many Texas fans know this. Obviously, Chip probably knows it. But like seeing this kid, Baxter can really catch the football. And in fact, he was used as a receiver quite a bit during his sophomore year of high school. We've seen him play some 7-on stuff. So be on the lookout there for Baxter to catch the ball maybe a little bit for Texas.
And his high school coach said he had the best hands on that Edgewater team.
There's no doubt. I mean, he was a special player for Edgewater. Offensive line wise, I felt like Texas sort of turned a corner last year. They were very healthy up front for the most part. They had 4 guys play at least 825 snaps, which is great. And then the 5th guy played 750, but it kind of felt like they were more physical than they had been in prior years. Now, everybody returns, at least on my depth chart. Maybe I'm missing somebody here. Are they just running the same 5 back? Is there anybody who we think has a chance to step up and burst into the starting lineup and maybe claim a new spot?
Yeah, I mean, they were pleasantly surprised with the play of Cole Hudson, who started every game at right guard despite having an AC joint sprain all year. The kid was so tough. He did not want to have the surgery until after the season. He had that surgery. He played ahead of DJ Campbell, who was the number 1 ranked interior lineman in the 2022 recruiting class. Now, I'm hearing DJ Campbell's making his move and took advantage of all the reps that he got in spring football while Cole Hudson was out. And they really like Cam Williams, who's a 6'7", 350-pound tackle who is behind 6th-year offensive lineman Christian Jones right now, but he is ready, and they feel like he can step in as the number 3 tackle on the left side or the right side. And then, whether it's Cole Hudson or DJ Campbell, you've got your 3rd guard. You want to have 3 tackles, 3 guards, and 2 centers. And Connor Robertson, another freshman, they feel is a prime backup at center for Jake Majors. So you're right, Bud. That's the reason why I take Texas seriously this year. I've covered this program for 30 years. Texas fans always think they're, this is the year, but they're actually solid in the trenches for the first time really since 2006, 2005, when they won the national championship. Even when they went to the national championship game in 2009, that offensive line wasn't very good. That was all Colt McCoy and Jordan Shipley making it happen. So this is the first time since, really 20 years that Texas looks solid and deep in both the offensive and defensive lines.
So let's switch over to that defensive line. Last year, the defense was 15th in the country. It was pretty bend but don't break when it comes to defending the pass, and executed pretty well. Like occasionally, like late game situations, they struggle to get off the field. at times, but still a really huge jump for a defense that in 2021 was a bit of a sieve. Like they lose what? Just Keandre Coburn and Mauro Ojomo, so that's two defensive tackles off the defensive front. What's your level of confidence in this group, Chip?
Well, they're deep. And so while losing Keandre Coburn, who was a really, evolved into a really good one technique, who could hold the point of attack against the run and then learn to push the pocket. And Mauro Ojomo, more athletic as a three technique. They'll miss those guys, but they have Tavondre Sweat, who I think is an NFL player who can play both the one and the three technique. And the guy that everyone is raving about is Byron Murphy, who reminds Texas fans of Roy Miller, who was just that undersized plugger who seemed to be in on every tackle. These two guys are going to be the keys to the defense, in my opinion. So they have to stay healthy. They like Baron Sorrell, who had 5.5 sacks last year, long-armed, athletic. He's gotten bigger, stronger, more confident. And then the guy to watch is Anthony Hill, the freshman, the true freshman, number one linebacker in the country in the 2023 recruiting class, because this guy is capable of playing middle. He's capable of playing weak side linebacker, but he is special rushing the passer. He was in high school. It showed up again in spring football. He has a knack for getting his hand on the football when the quarterback is holding it, causing turnovers in the backfield. Privately, the coaches don't want to get ahead of themselves, but they're intrigued by Anthony Hill. So remember that name.
Absolutely. Literally, my next question that I was going to ask you was, if the defensive line takes another step and turns pressures into sacks, who gets those sacks? And I think Hill and Sorrell, obviously the answer there. At linebacker, they do lose 3 of their top 4, at least by snap count. So Overshown, Ovi Agufo, and Tucker Dorsey. What's the level of, I guess, concern or confidence there? I mean, that's quite a bit to lose off of defense. But Jalen Ford does come back.
Yeah, Jalen Ford is the key there. If you're talking about guys who cannot, be off the field, Jalen Ford for this defense, he should have been the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year last year. My gosh, he had 4 interceptions, 3 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries. Every big play that Texas made defensively, he seemed to be in on. They forced a fumble late against Iowa State when Iowa State was driving for a go-ahead score late. I mean, he just is always around the football and high football IQ. So whether you have David Benda, who's a 5th-year guy who's waited his turn behind DeMarvion Overshown, who I think will probably get the first look at weak side linebacker, or if Anthony Hill develops into that guy immediately, they've got a little bit of depth, not a ton. And Maurice Blackwell's another guy, Mo Blackwell, who moved from safety to linebacker. He's gotten bigger. He's really fast, good instincts. So unproven, but some talent there. But Jalen Ford is the key.
In the secondary, they return, honestly, quite a bit. They lose Jameson. They lose Anthony Cook, who I feel like I've seen those guys play some level of football ever since the Falcons and Patriots played that Super Bowl in Houston. Remember that? Were you at that Nike camp back when Nike still had camps? And it was like, Nike was like, it's cool that we're doing this opening camp the same weekend of the Super Bowl, with the exception that we had to go pay like $700 for a courtyard outside the Woodlands and drive like. Anyway, those guys were there that day. I remember thinking like, Tom Herman's got a decent little class put together. They had, I guess, solid careers, maybe not quite up to the level of what their rankings were, coming out. How do they replace those guys? Can this secondary be even better than it was last year?
Yeah, I think the stability now with Pete Kwiatkowski settling in, he's a guy who, there was so much turnover on defense from Tom Herman. He changed coordinators the last 2 years that he was there. From Todd Orlando to Chris Ash, then Sarkisian comes in, Pete Kwiatkowski. I think some of these players were like, we're learning a third defense in 3 years. But they found success in the transfer portal with Ryan Watts from Ohio State last year, who was solid, rock solid at the boundary corner. And they brought in Gavin Holmes from Wake Forest, who they love. Guy's a burner. And then Jalen Catalon coming in at safety from Arkansas, who, had a little cleanup surgery on that shoulder. And Texas feels like he's going to be back to the Jalen Catalon who was, an all SEC freshman at Arkansas. So I do think there's a chance this secondary is better. If Catalon is back to his old ways, and he did not like playing the middle safety in that 3 high safety look. He wanted to be more of a free range rover in a 2 safety system. He's going to get that. And then you bring in, Malik Muhammad, the number 1 corner in the 2023 recruiting class. They've got a lot of length at that. Terrence Brooks, who, decommitted from Ohio State and came to Texas. They got a lot of length at corner. They got a lot of athleticism, a lot of competition. And I think that Texas feels like they're going to be okay in the secondary. They're not deep at safety. And that's the big concern. You need Jalen Catalon to kind of be that guy, along with Jaron Thompson, who's another veteran for Texas at safety.
I'm liking a lot of what I'm hearing about these Longhorns. Depth along both lines of scrimmage, loaded at receiver. You got some quarterback depth, linebacker safety depth concerns. This is something I think Steve Sarkisian, they should be considered the favorite to win the Big 12, right? Like that would you take Texas over the field? Like, should they be odds on in your opinion?
They should be.
Okay.
They should be odds on. They have the most talented roster. They've got experienced leadership at every meaningful position on defense. The fact that they've got all that experience up front on both lines, and a quarterback who should be ready to make a big jump in the second year of Steve Sarkisian's offense. I mean, I think there are a lot of teams looking at Texas's roster and saying, man, they might just finally put it all together this time. They might not get, dizzy on their press clippings. They might actually grind this thing out and go win a Big 12 championship. So I look at this team and I say, it's a player-led team. The culture's good. Steve Sarkisian hasn't lost players he wanted to keep to the transfer portal. In fact, he's gotten players. A.D. Mitchell from Georgia at receiver is like a windfall. And as you mentioned, no one's talking about Jatavian Sanders. He was the first team all Big 12 tight end last year, and a matchup nightmare for teams. So it looks really good. And Steve Sarkisian's really good at spreading the ball around. So it just looks like it's coming together. But, I think that also makes Texas fans nervous because they have battered fan syndrome. I mean, they have whiplash from all the times they thought Texas was about to break through.
And because somehow we did not mention this guy's name, I think he's one of my favorite players to watch in college football, because he's kind of reminds me of a guy that I grew up watching. I love Walter Jones coming up, who played for Florida State, and then NFL Hall of Famer, first ballot guy, never allowed any sacks on Hasselbeck for the Seahawks. Kelvin Banks, man, is so much fun. You don't see these tackles just played with this level of nastiness that much anymore. He messes guys up. If you guys do not watch, I'm telling you, Kelvin Banks on Texas is a really fun watch. Watch their left tackle. He's a nasty dude.
Yeah, started big number 78. He started as a true freshman, and in week 2, he's got to take on Will Anderson. He did not give up a sack to Will Anderson. He didn't give up a sack to Felix Anudike-Uzama, the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. He didn't give up a sack to Will McDonald, a first-round pick in the NFL draft out of Iowa State. I mean, this guy is special, and nothing's too big for him. He's a guy who looks out for his teammates. He's a really solid leader. Jordan Whittington told me a funny story last year during fall camp. Whittington dropped a pass, and all of a sudden he sees this big 78 running down the field saying, "It's okay. It's okay. We'll get him next play." And Jordan Whittington's like, "This guy's a freshman. He's telling me everything's going to be okay. I've been here 4 years." And so that's just who Kelvin Banks is. He's a special guy. And, he was an all Big 12 performer as a true freshman, and is the leader of that group as a rising sophomore.
The schedule is within the conference. I feel like the schedule is very manageable. You don't have any of these kind of way out of their road trips where you have to go to West Virginia or to Lubbock. I mean, the farthest they go is Ames. Several of their conference road games are within the state of Texas. At Baylor and at TCU and at Houston. You get Oklahoma technically the home game this year in Red River. That matchup week 2, though, I feel like that's one that the whole country is going to be watching. And if they win that, and Chip, you're ready for this hype to go just through the roof, right? If they win in Tuscaloosa, they're going to be like playoff or bust for sure.
Yeah, and Bud, I said before last year's game that I thought Texas would have a better chance winning in 2023 in Tuscaloosa than they would in Austin, facing Bryce Young, facing Will Anderson. And, here's Nick Saban. The guy seemingly has had to replace coordinators every year. This year, he's replacing both. He brings in Tommy Rees from Notre Dame, not one of his fired coaches association members. He goes and gets Kevin Steele from Miami. We're not quite sure who the quarterback is. I mean, if you're going to have any shot at ending Alabama's 24-game home winning streak, 18 straight at home at night, it's probably when there's uncertainty, if there's uncertainty at Alabama, and simply because you've got so much change and it's early in the year, maybe it plays to Texas's advantage, but again, they'll have to prove it. But I know that Alabama game is keeping these guys motivated all through summer workouts, and that helps. It helps to have a big marquee game, especially after losing to Alabama the way they did last year, kick a 49-yard field goal with 1:29 left to go up, and then Houdini Bryce Young finds a way to get them down the field and kick a field goal to win it 2019. This group, this team, it burns in them, and it's going to serve as great motivation through the summer.
Chip, really enjoyed the conversation. Horns 24/7 is the place to go. Check out that QR code on the screen. Horns 24/7 podcast as well, with the flagship, the Longhorn Blitz, and the State of Recruiting. Chip, enjoyed it, man.
Hey, Bud, anytime, man.
Absolutely. We'll have to have you back on.